Make politics boring again. Make politics boring again. Make politics boring again.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Make Politics Boring Again. This week I've got another 5 questions to answer which have been sent in by you, the listeners. And don't forget you can get in touch through the website makepoliticsboringagain.co.uk or through TikTok and Instagram at Make Politics Boring Again. So let's dive straight into the first question, which comes from Tom in London, and he asks, why is Saudi Arabia hosting the World Cup in 2034? Thanks for the great question, Tom, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering the same thing. So as most people will be aware, it was recently announced that Saudi Arabia will be hosting the 2034 World Cup, and this will add to its growing list of high-profile sporting events. So far, it's hosted everything from Formula 1 and boxing to golf and MMA. And this has really helped the country to go from just being a sponsor to being a global hub for sports. But given its human rights record, why is it being handed some of the world's biggest events? Well, the short answer is money. The longer answer is power. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plan to secure the country's future, because right now, oil makes up 70% of Saudi's government revenue and 50% of its GDP. But the world is shifting away from fossil fuels, and the kingdom knows that it can't rely on oil forever. So Vision 2030 is about attracting investment and building a reputation as a modern country that's friendly to business, and hosting major sporting events is a key part of that strategy. But this isn't just about tourism or economic growth, it's also about sports washing. Hosting these huge events helps Saudi Arabia to shift attention away from its human rights abuses and present itself as a progressive nation. The country still crushes political dissent, it jails activists and heavily restricts the freedom of the press, but governing bodies like FIFA, the IOC and the PGA are more than happy to accept Saudi money. They claim that bringing sport to the country can be a force for positive change, but the fact is that no other country can match the level of investment Saudi Arabia is offering. The Saudi government currently funds prize money, sponsorships, new stadiums, and even entire sports leagues. That's why we've seen a wave of footballers, both young and veteran, moving to Saudi Arabia for massive paychecks, probably inspired by Cristiano Ronaldo's record-breaking contract. This is why Formula 1, boxing and the golf have made Saudi a key stop in their annual calendars, and why global sporting institutions have no issue with ignoring the bigger picture. Western governments aren't pushing back either, because Saudi Arabia is simply too valuable. The United States still imports around 7% of its oil from Saudi Arabia, while the UK has increased energy imports from the kingdom after it cut ties with Russia for its energy supplies. But it's not just about oil. Saudi pours billions into Western economies. UK investment in Saudi Arabia hit $13 billion in 2023, and Saudi investments in the UK have totaled $21 billion since 2017. So a lot of money is flowing both ways. Saudi money is embedded in tech, banking, construction and media, making it far too important to ignore. So while politicians might criticise Saudi's human rights record, actually holding it to account would be politically and economically inconvenient. So when we look at the bigger picture, the World Cup isn't just about football, it's a strategic move. Hosting the tournament strengthens Saudi Arabia's ties with the West, boosts its global image, and makes it an even bigger player on the world stage. The end result is that billions flow through sponsorships and broadcasting deals, while human rights concerns take a back seat, and Saudi Arabia continues shaping the global sports industry on its own terms. Thank you very much for that question, Tom, and I hope it answers it. Feel free to send another one in for next week's episode. So question 2 is sent in anonymously, but thank you very much for getting in touch. So they've asked, why don't we hear more about cars that run on alternative fuels like ammonia? And this is a good question, because electric vehicles dominate the conversation on clean energy to the point where we believe that they're the only green option when it comes to cars. We don't often hear about any other alternatives to electric vehicles. Hydrogen, biofuels, and ammonia-powered engines all offer ways to cut carbon emissions, but they barely get any attention. This isn't because they don't work, but because they don't fit the business model of the industries leading the energy transition. Ammonia-powered cars have already been proven viable by innovators like Gregory Vezina, who's the CEO of Hydrofuel Inc. His work has proven that ammonia can fuel vehicles with zero carbon emissions, and the infrastructure to produce it already exists. Today, 70% of ammonia is already used in fertilizers, with the rest going to industrial applications. The shipping industry is even testing ammonia-powered engines, with projects like the retrofitting of tugboats to run on ammonia instead of diesel. The technology works, so why is it not being developed for cars? Because the companies shaping the future of transport don't want it. Oil companies and car manufacturers aren't resisting change, they're trying to control it. The same corporations that ruled the petrol era have made sure that they dominate the electric vehicle revolution by securing their hold over battery production, energy grids, and charging infrastructure. The shift to electric vehicles isn't just about sustainability, it's about keeping control in the same hands. Government policy makes this even clearer. Countries like the UK have committed to phasing out petrol and diesel cars. The UK currently plans to ban new petrol and diesel sales by 2030. But instead of supporting multiple alternatives, they've thrown subsidies and tax breaks exclusively at electric vehicles. Ammonia-powered vehicles have major advantages like faster refueling and longer range compared to batteries, but without investment or political backing, they just can't compete. That's not to say ammonia is a perfect solution. Switching to it would require new refueling stations, engine modifications and infrastructure investment, which is expensive, and electric vehicles already have a massive head start, so they're the easier bet in the short term. There's also safety concerns because ammonia is toxic and needs careful handling, which adds regulatory hurdles and higher costs. And while it does store more energy per unit than batteries, it still stores less than petrol, meaning that cars would need larger tanks or more frequent refueling. Still, none of these challenges are impossible to solve. The real reason ammonia isn't gaining traction is that it doesn't serve the financial interests of the corporations leading the energy transition. Electric vehicles are taking over because governments and industry have already chosen them as the future. Without investment in other options, ammonia and other alternative fuels will stay on the sidelines, not because they don't work, but because they don't fit the profit-driven roadmap of those in control. Thank you very much to the person who sent that question in, and please feel free to send in another one. So, on a similar note to that previous question, the next question asks, who really controls the future of energy, governments or big business? So, we're often told that the shift to clean energy is a fight against climate change, which is being led by the government. But in reality, big business is very much in control. Oil giants, energy firms, and banks decide the pace and direction of the transition to make sure that renewables protect their profits rather than disrupt their dominance. This is why the rollout of green energy has been so slow, because it's not about saving the planet, it's about keeping power in the same hands. Fossil fuel companies still dictate energy policy. They make these grand promises about going green, but in the end, they will still stick with oil and gas because that's where the money is. Governments might talk about phasing out fossil fuels, but at the same time, they're handing out subsidies and tax breaks that keep fossil fuels dominant. Energy corporations and politicians are closely connected, as many politicians push policies that benefit big energy firms in exchange for high-paying jobs when they leave office. This keeps oil and gas in control, while alternative fuel companies struggle to get a foot in the door. But big business isn't just resisting renewables, it's taking over the entire industry. Oil companies are buying up solar and wind farms, investing in hydrogen, and securing government contracts for energy storage. So even as we shift towards renewables, the same corporate giants remain in charge, but they're just wearing a green label. This means that they still control the energy market, still dictate government policies, and still set prices. So even as production costs for renewables drop, consumers continue paying more while the company's profits stay intact. In the UK, government policy still favours big corporations over community-led energy projects. Offshore wind, nuclear, and hydrogen are dominated by multinational firms, but local solar initiatives and decentralised energy grids struggle to get any funding. A clear example of this is the Low Carbon Hub in Oxfordshire, which has developed 55 renewable energy projects, including the UK's largest community-owned solar park called Ray Valley Solar. Despite this, community energy groups have struggled financially since 2015 because of cuts in government support and restrictions preventing them from selling their own locally produced energy. This shows once again how the shift to green energy does not mean that we're moving towards energy independence. It means that the green energy industry will simply be kept in corporate hands. So where does this leave us? Well, the future of energy depends on whether governments actually challenge corporate control. If they break up energy monopolies, invest in independent renewables, and fund alternative fuels, the transition could be fairer and more democratic. But if big business keeps steering the transition, then nothing really changes. Fossil fuels might fade, but the same elite networks will still run the show. Clean energy won't be a win for the public. It will just be the same system, rebranded. We're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, I'll be answering the final two questions of this episode. Don't forget that you can get in touch via the website or via Instagram, TikTok, and Spotify at Make Politics Boring Again.
Please hold and we'll answer your call as soon as possible.
Make politics boring again. Make politics boring again.
Welcome back. Now we have another question from Tom in London, who asks, how does DeepSeek change the landscape of AI? Now, anyone who's interested in AI knows that the AI Cold War isn't coming, it's already here. And let's be clear, artificial intelligence is not just about convenience or automation, it's about power. Because the governments and corporations who are leading in the AI industry will shape the global economy by dictating who gets jobs and who controls the flow of information. For years, the United States has dominated the AI industry through OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, but that monopoly is now starting to crack. China is building its own AI ecosystem that doesn't rely on Silicon Valley, and DeepSeek is just the start of that. So what actually is DeepSeek? It's a large language model developed in China designed to rival ChatGPT, Gemini, and Microsoft's Copilot. Previous Chinese AI models have lagged behind these competitors, but DeepSeek is a major leap forward. It's capable of processing complex information at a level that puts it in direct competition with Western AI models. It's been trained on vast datasets within China's own digital ecosystem, which allows it to function independently of models and infrastructure made in the United States. And it operates with fewer restrictions on content and data usage than Western AI models do, which gives it a potential edge in development speed and integration across industries. The West is currently caught up in regulations, ethics debates, and corporate battles, but China is moving forward. Here in the West, tech giants want to dominate the industry and block competition. Governments want stricter regulations to protect their own influence. And consumers want AI that is open and unbiased. But instead, we're watching tech companies and governments fight over who gets to control AI. But China definitely isn't waiting around for the West to get its shit together, because it's now launched DeepSeek as a direct challenge to Silicon Valley's dominance. Don't be misled by the fact that DeepSeek is new either, because it's not playing catch up. It's a real competitor, and it's already being used in China's financial markets, universities, and industrial networks. Banks and investment firms are integrating it into trading algorithms. Universities are training engineers specifically for its development. Shipping ports are using it to optimize logistics and secure data. Unlike in the West, where AI development is driven by corporate interests, China's AI push is state-led, which ensures that it serves national power instead of corporate profits. As a competitor, DeepSeek is already doing quite well. As soon as it was launched, Nvidia's stock took a significant hit, and investors are now worried that China might start reducing its reliance on American-made AI chips. But the United States is already pushing back. Pennsylvania has banned DeepSeek from government devices, and there's likely to be broader restrictions. But let's be honest, is this really about national security, or is it just about protecting Silicon Valley's monopoly? Because the world is now splitting into two AI ecosystems. One led by the United States and its allies, where governments regulate AI to protect private industry, and another led by China, where AI is developed as a state-controlled tool of power. If DeepSeek keeps gaining ground, the West has two choices: compete with it, or ban it altogether. Here in the UK, I would bet that the Labour government follows the same path as the Tories did and moves to ban it, just like we did with Huawei and other Chinese tech, because our politics are reactionary and short-sighted. When it comes to global decisions like this, we don't lead anymore, we follow. So the UK will wait to see what the EU and the United States decide, and when they make their move, we'll fall in line just like the good little vassal state we've become. So thanks again to Tom for that great question. And on to the final question of this episode from Nigel in Pembury. And he asks, are local councils being wiped out by bigger government? So this refers to Labour's English Devolution White Paper, which was published in December 2024. And this white paper is a textbook case of Orwellian doublespeak, because it promises to give more power to local communities, when in reality it's stripping away their ability to make decisions. Labour's plan is to abolish district councils and replace them with larger unitary authorities and directly elected mayors, under the guise of making local government more efficient. In practice, this means less local democracy, weaker accountability, and more control concentrated in Westminster. But what does this actually mean for you? So right now, if your bins aren't collected, your road is full of potholes, or a housing development is being pushed through, you can go straight to a district councillor who lives in your area and represents a small community. Under Labour's new plan though, your town loses its council and gets absorbed into a much larger regional authority. So instead of a local representative who knows your area, you'll be one of hundreds of thousands competing for attention from a council that sees your town as just another dot on a map. Housing and transport decisions will also be pulled further away from local control. Right now, district councils can block large developments if local infrastructure like roads, schools, and hospitals aren't prepared for the extra demand. Under the new system, however, those decisions will be made regionally, where economic growth takes priority over local concerns. If a regional mayor wants a mass housing project to attract investment, it will go ahead whether your town supports it or not. The The same goes for public transport. Bus routes in smaller towns could be cut as funding is redirected towards bigger cities. Rural areas could be left with fewer services, while cities receive investment in major transport hubs. The Labour Party argues that directly elected mayors will make decision-making more democratic, but in reality, it's the exact opposite. Instead of a council of elected representatives debating local issues, one person will hold all the power, backed by unelected advisors. Once in office, a mayor won't need local approval to push through big decisions. If they cut services, approve mass developments, or prioritise urban growth over rural communities, there will be very little that anyone can do to stop them. Parish councils will technically remain, but with less funding and no real influence. Without district councils backing them, they'll be reduced to advisory bodies rather than decision makers. Labour calls this devolution, but really it's about removing barriers to central control. Unitary councils and mayors will still rely on Westminster for funding, so the central government will dictate spending and policy. The real winners from this policy are property developers like Berkeley Group, infrastructure firms like SSE, and financial institutions like Barclays and HSBC. They all prefer to deal with one large authority that can approve projects quickly rather than multiple district councils that might slow things down with local objections. For you, this means less representation, fewer elected officials fighting your corner, and fewer ways to challenge decisions that affect your town. The focus won't be on local concerns, it will be on regional economic growth dictated from above. So Labour is saying that it will give power back to communities, but actually what it will do is just centralise control even further and make it easier for developers, corporations and government officials to push through their plans without local resistance. So thank you very much to Nigel for that question, and please feel free to send in another one for next week's episode. So that's all we have time for this week, but thank you very much for listening, and if you want to send in your own question, you can contact the podcast through the website, through Instagram, TikTok and even Spotify at Make Politics Boring Again. Thanks again for listening, look after each other, and see you next week.
Make politics boring again. Make politics boring again. Make politics boring again. Make